Hey, let me tell you a story. Night shifts at the 911 call center are never quiet, but that night started like any other. Operators sipping cold coffee, logging the usual disturbances, bar fights, drunk drivers, another domestic dispute, the kind of routine chaos they could almost predict, the kind of noise you grow numb to after years on the job. But then the line blinked red, and a voice came through that no one could ever forget. A woman, gasping, terrified, her words tumbling over each other. She said there was someone in her yard, a shadow moving along the window. She begged them to send police right away. Her voice was shaking, broken, the kind of fear you can hear. Deep in the throat, the operator did everything by the book, kept her talking, asked about the intruder, asked if she could see him, but her words grew sharper. She said he was already inside. She said she could feel him standing right behind the door. And then the line filled with static, a crash, a scream, and silence. The patrol got there in 7 minutes, too late. She was on the living room floor, her body cooling on the hardwood, the phone still clutched in her hand, the call still open, as if the line had refused to end. Officers stood frozen as they realized the operator was still listening, still hearing their footsteps through the dead woman's phone. At first, no one wanted to call it strange. Police said the intruder must have forced her to dial, must have enjoyed letting dispatch hear her die, a sadistic taunt. But 2 nights later it happened again. This time it was a man, his voice slow, ragged. He said someone was in his hallway. He swore he could hear a metallic drag across the wall, like a blade or a pipe scraping paint. He repeated his address over and over, desperate, trying to be clear. Then there was a short grunt, a struggle, and the call cut off. The officers were dispatched immediately. They arrived in under 9 minutes, but when they forced the apartment door, they found him sprawled across the floor, blood pooling beneath his shirt, his phone beside him, the call still active, still transmitting an empty room. No intruder, no footprints, no trace, just a dead man and a line that wouldn't hang up. By the 3rd call, the pattern was impossible to deny. A teenage girl whispering into the phone from under her bed. She said there was a man pacing in her room. She begged the operator not to let him hear her voice. The dispatcher tried to reassure her, promised her officers were all ready. On the way, the girl whispered her address again, soft, trembling. Then there was silence. When the patrol entered the house less than 10 minutes later, they found her lifeless body still under the bed, her phone in her hand, the call open, the line buzzing faintly as if someone else was still on it. The operator who had taken that call walked outside after the report came back. He leaned against the brick wall and vomited into the trash can, because the recording made it sound like the girl had been alive until the very last second, alive until the exact moment the officers kicked the door in. Investigators combed through the audio. Digital forensics teams tried to pull the metadata, but everything matched. The calls were real. The phones were real. The voices were authentic. There was no splicing, no interference. Experts swore on their careers these weren't recordings or fakes. They were living people calling for their lives and dying in real time. That was when the press caught wind of it. The city paper ran a headline calling him the Phantom of 911, a killer who played with dispatch like a cat with a mouse, a predator who staged murders for an audience of operators and cops who would always be just a few minutes too late. As more calls poured in, the rules of the game began to shift. It wasn't just the panic of victims anymore. Some calls contained details that shouldn't have been there. One victim whispered the name of the patrol officer who was en route. Another said she could hear the sound of police sirens before they ever arrived. One man gasping into the phone said He knew the name of the dispatcher he was speaking to, like someone was feeding them the information in real time. It felt less like chance and more like orchestration. Someone was watching the system from the inside. Someone who knew how to turn 911 into a stage. Operators started dreading the red blink on their consoles. Some of them prayed the line would be a false alarm, a prank, anything but another voice begging for life. The stress became unbearable. Veterans who had sat through years of trauma admitted they couldn't sleep anymore. One woman swore she kept hearing her own headset ringing even when she was at home, alone in bed. And then came the night the rules broke completely. An operator named Claire was working the desk. She was steady, experienced, the kind who never lost her cool. When the line lit up, she answered the way she had answered thousands of times. But the voice on the other end stopped her breath. It was her own voice, trembling, pleading. She was begging for help, saying someone was in her apartment. She gave her own address, her own name, her own description. Her hands shook as she pulled the headset off, but the console kept glowing red. The line still active, every other operator staring at her in stunned silence. The sound of her own terror still spilling into the room. Officers raced to her apartment, kicked down the door, found nothing but a still warm cup of coffee on her counter and the faint smell of cologne in the air. That was the night the call center realized they weren't just listening to death anymore. They were being invited into it. Step by step, the days after Claire's call felt unreal. The station filled with silence heavier than any siren. Supervisors tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a technical loop. Maybe someone spliced her voice from recordings. But deep down everyone knew the truth. The system was being bent, twisted into something it was never meant to be. Calls kept coming, each one darker, each one closer. A man begging for help as he described the exact wallpaper in the operator's own bedroom. A woman sobbing as she whispered the license plate of the patrol car speeding toward her house. Dispatchers stared at their screens, afraid to breathe, afraid that the next call would say their name. The police were drowning. Every scene the same, a body cooling on the floor, a phone clutched in a hand, the call still active, the killer, always gone, always a step ahead. They tore through the city like a ghost hunt, searching abandoned houses, combing alleys, chasing leads that dissolved into nothing. It wasn't just crime anymore, it was theater. The killer had turned the whole city into an audience, and the 911 line into a stage. Rumors spread fast. Officers whispered that the Phantom must be ex-law enforcement, someone who knew the system, someone who had once worn the badge and now wore their secrets like armor. Civilians spun stories online, podcasts, conspiracy boards. Everyone had a theory, a hacker, a cult, a demon feeding on fear, but none of them fit. The truth was sharper, simpler. The Phantom was a predator who understood the one weakness everyone shared, the need to be heard in the final seconds. Claire refused to go home after her call. She stayed in the building night after night, watching her console, daring it to light up again. Her colleagues begged her to rest, but she couldn't. She needed to know why her own voice had cried out for help. She needed to know if she was already marked. And then, at 3:31 in the morning, the line blinked red. She put on her headset with hands that didn't feel like hers. The voice came soft and steady. Male, calm, almost soothing. It said her name, said he had been waiting, said he liked the sound of her panic last time, but he wanted to hear it in person. She tried to trace the call, but the system froze. Every line of code scrambled as if someone had wiped it in real time. Officers were dispatched, but not to a stranger's address, to the very call center itself, to the building where Claire sat frozen, her headset buzzing with a voice that seemed to come from the walls. The patrol stormed inside, guns drawn, but found nothing, just rows of consoles, glowing screens, and Claire staring ahead, pale as chalk, the headset hanging from her fingers. She told them the voice had been describing their exact approach, their boots on the stairs, their weapons raised, like he was standing right behind them the whole time. The city reached breaking point. Newspapers screamed. The mayor held press conferences, promising the phantom would be caught. But every night the calls continued. Families murdered in their homes. Students dragged from dorm rooms. Every crime scene a stage left behind for police to stumble through. Every victim a caller who had begged in real time. And then came the final twist. The line lit up at midnight, every console in the room flashing red. Operators gasped as they all heard it together. A chorus of voices, dozens of them. Every victim who had died, their cries layered, overlapping, filling the room with chaos, each one repeating the moment before their death, begging for help, their words spiraling into a storm of grief and terror. Then, buried inside the storm, a new voice broke through. Calm, precise, it told them there would be one final performance, one last call. The officers scrambled, tracing the signal, forcing techs to reroute every server, until they landed on an address, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. Units swarmed it, but the place was empty, except for a single phone on the concrete floor, ringing. When they answered, the voice was already waiting, low and smooth. It told them they had been good audience members, loyal, attentive, always arriving just in time to see the curtain close. It said the city needed stories, and it had written them with blood. It said there would always be another call, another voice, because people never stopped dying. The line went dead, but the phone stayed warm in the officer's hand, like it had just been held by someone else. Back at the center, Claire sat alone at her console, her screen flickering, her headset silent. She tried to tell herself it was over, that the phantom had finally spoken his last words. But as the clock ticked past 3 in the morning, the console blinked again. She swallowed, reached for the headset, put it on, and froze. The voice on the line was her own again, trembling, whispering, begging for help. She gave her address, her name. The sound of footsteps filled the background. She could hear herself screaming, could hear the exact moment her breath cut out, and the console recorded every second. The patrol rushed to her apartment once more. They found the door ajar, the lights still on, a half-empty glass of water by the sink, the place untouched. But her phone was lying on the floor, warm, connected to the line, still transmitting the echo of her own voice fading into silence. The city never found the phantom. Some said he was a man. Some said he was a ghost wired into the system. Some said he was a reflection of death itself. But the calls never really stopped. Every few months, another operator somewhere across the country would swear they heard a voice that shouldn't exist, a call that couldn't be made, a plea that came seconds too late. And late at night, when the call center falls quiet, some operators swear they can hear her voice again, Claire's voice, faint, trembling, whispering through the static, begging anyone who's listening to pick up. So, if your phone ever rings in the dark, if you ever hear a voice that sounds like your own begging for help, remember this story. Remember the Phantom of 911. And if you want to hear more stories that dig under your skin, don't forget to subscribe.